folks, Ronnie Turner here again with you from the Prophecy Freak YouTube channel. And this week we've got Mark Biltz, the pastor, coming up with his latest update on the blood moons as we approach the final blood moons of this tetrad coming up September 28th. And with all the things going on in the world, the Shemitah just ending, and now we're into the Super Shemitah or the Jubilee. And talks of earthquakes in Chile, I believe, in 8.3 today. And then there's a lot of chatter on YouTube. You might have seen it, you might have not. There's an asteroid that's going to hit the Earth September 23rd, which just happens to be the day the Pope is coming to visit the President. And of course, we've got meetings going on in the UN talking about Palestinian state, recognizing East Jerusalem as part of Palestine. So there's just so much going on right now, it's hard to keep up with it all. But Pastor Mark Biltz has given us an update here on the blood moons and what he thinks these are signs of and why he thinks they're signs from God. And I think the most important thing he mentions is that we need to make sure we're ready, that we've made that decision for Jesus Christ, and that we're right with God, and we're ready for whatever the world sends our way. So I thought you guys would like to see this. It's his official update. Mark Biltz is the pastor who officially discovered the tetrad, the blood moons on the Jewish feast holidays, and then ties that to the biblical scripture talking about using the moon and the sun as signs in the heavens for festivals, as opposed to the seasons is what it's translated. It actually means festivals. So I thought you guys would want to see this. So we'll let you take a look and check it out, see what you think.
Heavens are declaring the glory of God. I firmly believe in biblical astronomy. I mean, even in the Job, and God mentions Orion. He mentions the 7 stars of Pleiades. He mentions Arcturus. He mentions stars. God created the stars. As a matter of fact, he said he calls them all by name. And so the difference between biblical astronomy and astrology says it's all about you. Okay, you may be sweet, but yeah, it's not about you, you know. It's about God. And as long as our focus is on God's glory, then you're not going to fall into error. Oh my goodness, even at his birth, the star of Bethlehem, and the Magi following the star. And this is based on Balaam's prophecy that will a star, arise. And so, we can see that.
Okay, what else?
Well, I like to begin at the beginning. God said in Genesis 1, he created the stars to send signals on his feast days. So that just tells us it's scriptural just from that very basis. So I like to start there. And then I like to go to Psalms 19. Again, the heavens are declaring the glory of God. Matter of fact, it says their line has gone out through the earth. In Hebrew, it implies their chorus line. They're singing God's praises. So, to me, and then when Jesus says in Luke 21:25, there will be signs in the sun and the moon. In Isaiah, it says the sun will turn to sackcloth, the moon to blood. In Joel, it says the sun will turn to sackcloth, the moon to blood.
Isn't it interesting? It specifically refers to the moon being turned to blood.
Yes.
And I stood in my driveway in Phoenix and saw literally the moon turn to blood. It was awesome.
And the amazing thing to me is how God knows what's going to happen. And in Joel, in the context of the moon turning to blood, the next verse is, and he will judge all the nations who are trying to divide Jerusalem. Well, what's going on politically right now? That's the big issue, is Jerusalem, and it's in the context of him judging those nations. And here America's at the forefront of dividing the land. That verse that you're talking about ends with, because of all that they have done. See, the nations say, look what all the Jews have done. They've broken covenant. And it says, no, that ain't going to happen. My favorite, I think, is Psalms 105, where it says the covenant that he's given will last for 1,000 generations. If a generation is 60 years, that's 60,000 years. We've only been on the planet as humans for 6,000 years, which means for, 10 more lifetimes from Adam to now.
True.
Oh, yeah. And even in Revelation, it talks about the woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet. And a lot of people don't know, but you can get an astronomy program. And almost every Rosh Hashanah, Virgo, is seen from Israel, clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet.
Mark,
once a month is the lunar orbit around Earth, okay? If here's the Earth and here's the moon The moon's orbit around the Earth is elliptical. It'll be far away, and then it'll be close, and far away and close. And the distance isn't always the same. The furthest point, 1 month might be here, 1 month it might be here, 1 month it might be here. So it changes, okay, as it goes.
Which causes the size of the moon, the appearance of the moon,
exactly,
to enlarge or
so
get
if
smaller.
a supermoon is when the moon is at its closest point to Earth in its orbit. If it's a new moon, you don't even see it. But if it's a full moon, then they call it a supermoon because the moon looks 14% larger because instead of being clear over here, it's right here.
Okay, you've used the word perigee.
That is
Quite a
when
bit.
it's at its closest point. When it's at its furthest point, it's called apogee.
Okay.
So here's that apogee. It comes around here. It's at perigee.
Now, we've had 3 blood moons to date.
Yes.
Have they been perigees? Where have they
They
fallen?
haven't been a supermoon. What's so exciting is this last one is going to be a supermoon. Not only for the month, but for the entire year. It'll be at its closest point to Earth for the entire year.
We've had Jonathan Kahn on a number of times. He's talked about the Shemitah. He's declared we're in a Shemitah year. Help us to understand what the Shemitah is.
Every 7th year, the land had to rest. In Israel's history, that's what they were to do. The land was to rest. But it also was an economic reset year. In other words, all the debts were to be forgiven. So then what's fascinating is because of that, when Israel went into the Babylonian captivity, okay, that was for 70 years. Why? Because they did not keep that 7th year for 490 years. And so God, you take 490 divided by 7, that's 70. So God said, because you did not let the land rest every 7th year, the land gets to have all those 70 times at once, and you're out of the land. But what happened, which a lot of people don't realize, which is incredible, is, as you know, so many times when
Everybody
they
catch
see...
that, by the way? One way or another, God is going to get his Shemitah. The land will rest.
Exactly.
Whether it's every 7th year or all at once, 70 years.
Exactly. And so what happens, if you read the prophet Jeremiah, they're ready to destroy the temple. Nebuchadnezzar is coming. And as you know, what do us humans do when we see judgment coming? Oh, God, help us. You know, we don't need him when everything is going good, but we always turn him in trouble, right? And so
Human nature.
So they decided they were going to keep the Shemitah year that year. And they set the captives free, everyone that was indebted to them. But here's what happened. Nebuchadnezzar was coming. Egypt came to help Israel. And when Egypt came to help Israel, Nebuchadnezzar left the first time. And then guess what? All of Israel thought Egypt was the one who saved them, not God. And so they put everyone back in economic bondage again. Well, what I think is fascinating is look at 2001. 2001 was the 7th year of the Shemitah cycle. And here the Dow falls 7% on the first day of the 7th month of the 7th year. Exactly 7 years later in 2008. It was on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the 7th month, the Dow fell 777 points. It was a 7% drop on a failed $700 billion bailout, resulting in a $700 billion loss on the first day of the 7th month of the 7th year of cycle.
I'm hearing a lot of 7s. Are you?
And so now that brings us to 2015. Now this year, Rosh Hashanah is September 13th, which is a Sunday, and the markets are closed. So the last day they're open is Friday, 9/11.
Could be a very interesting day. We'll know when this airs what this means. So what do you predict is going to happen? What do you...
Well, it's very important, and I want people to know, I don't predict anything will happen on the day of the eclipse. I'm not setting dates. NASA sets the dates of the eclipse. God sets the dates of the calendar. All I'm doing is connecting the dots. I like to explain it this way. If you're driving down the highway and you see a sign that says bridges out ahead, if you're going 60 miles an hour, you better hope it's not 10 feet away.
Right.
You know, you hope it's a mile
well
down.
Said.
Okay.
I get the picture.
God brings these signs not because it's going to happen at the very moment you see the sign. It's a warning because God has always warned before he brings judgment. He has no desire in the death of the wicked. God has no desire to bring judgment. So he always warns before. So I see all of these things as events that could even unfold in 2016 through 2017.
So I'm going to squeeze predictions out of you in just a second, but I want to go back to the significance of this specific blood moon, the fourth consecutive blood moon on Sukkot, which is a pilgrimage feast.
Right.
Very significant, and is the final feast of the year. It's the Feast of Ingathering.
Yes.
I believe it's prophetically directly connected, as you do, to the return of the Messiah, to the gathering
Revival.
of the elect. Revival, outpouring.
Just like in Acts.
But there's some very unique things. One, it's going to be a supermoon. The only out of
in
the
history,
four, the
first
only
time in history that this is the first time in history you will have a super blood moon on Sukkot in the Shemitah year.
So history, going
this
back
never
5,000
happened. Yeah, this
years,
hasn't happened. That
NASA's been able to go back 5,000 years on this, all mathematical.
Yeah.
First one in history,
Yes.
at least in 5,000 years. So
Right.
it's going to be at perigee.
Yes.
Okay, at the closest point, it'll be a super blood moon.
Yes.
It'll be most visible
In Jerusalem, in Israel.
In Jerusalem.
On Sukkot.
Now, the other three have not been visible in Israel. Is that correct?
Right. And a lot of people ask me, well, they don't have any significance because they weren't seen in Israel. Well, that's hooey. They weren't all seen in Israel in 48. They weren't all seen in Israel in 67. Plus, half the Jews are in America.
That's true.
And he's trying to tell them they need to get back to Israel.
Right. Good point. Most visible from Phoenix, by the way. But so anyway, so supermoon, most visible in Israel.
Right.
First time in 5,000 years.
Yes.
Happening in the Shemitah year.
Yeah, right at the
Anything
end.
else we need to know about this? Because it's about to happen.
Yes. Well, here's the thing that's amazing. Many of you know that there were 3 pilgrimage feasts. Only the men had to go. A lot of people don't know. The women didn't have to go, only the men. But what's fascinating is in the 7th year, every man, woman, child, stranger, everyone had to come on Sukkot at the end of the Shemitah cycle like this one is. It was for a huge ingathering, not just the men. Everybody had to come. And what was the reason why? Every 7th year, the king of Israel would read the Torah to the people.
Mm-hmm. I totally get where you're going with this. So we're talking about a miraculous event. We're
Huge.
talking about odds that are, if you calculated
Just off
them,
the charts.
are just astronomical.
And when you look at historically, things have happened, which is astronomical.
Okay, and that's where I want to go next. What's happening? And then we'll talk about what's going to happen. What's been happening? What have you seen happening around this period of the blood moons?
Oh my goodness.
That people may not be seeing.
Well, I would think everyone has been seeing some of these things happen. I mean, you've had the Gaza war last summer, okay, and which I think was very significant, and it was around the 9th of Av, the destruction of the temple. We've had the Ebola plague breakout. We've had ISIS on the march. You know, you have Iran, developing this nuclear weapon, and you have America at the forefront of allowing that, and pushing for the dividing of the land of Israel. I mean, there's been whole earthquakes are astronomical. If you look at the amount of the earthquakes and the magnitude, I mean, there's so many things that have been going on this last year and a half.
When you look at them individually, maybe not so much, but when you add them all together,
Yes.
just the scope of what's happening in the world today.
Yeah.
And the Bible talks about birth pangs.
Oh, yeah.
Increasing in intensity,
Right.
in frequency. I really see that happening.
Oh my goodness. And look at the economy. What's happening with the economy? A lot of the people are saying that the economy is on the verge of collapse right now, which is what, not trying to squeeze things out of me prophetically what's going to happen. But the 2 things that I think that have the potential is look at the patterns. You have a biblically prophetic war involving Israel. But then the other thing is the economy. When you look at the Shemitah cycle, I think there's a good chance that you could see the economy collapse in a war with Israel.
Do you see these blood moons directly connecting to economic collapse and a war in Israel breaking out?
Yes, exactly. That's what I believe.
Now, what should we be expecting in terms of other major events that specifically tie to Israel and the Jewish people. So a war in Israel.
Right.
What else do you see?
Well, here's the thing.
Is it as if that's not enough?
Yeah. But I think there's more to it in this sense. As we've talked about, there were 3 pilgrimage feasts. I believe that God had Passover pilgrimage feast because he wanted all of Israel to see the crucifixion of the Messiah. I think he wanted them all there for Shavuot or Pentecost because he wanted them to see the Spirit being poured out. And I believe this last one for the Feast of Sukkot for the return of the Messiah. But just like in Babylon, a lot of the Jews didn't want to go back to Israel. They've been in Babylon for 70 years. You know, who cares about go back to Israel? There's war. There's the, you know, we don't want to do that. And the economy is good in Babylon. You know, so it's the same thing. A lot of the Jews, half the Jews in the world are in America, North, South America. God wants them to go back. And the prophecy was, first I'll send the fishers to fish them back, then I'll send them the hunters to chase them back.
So the question is, what's going to have to happen?
That is exactly
to get
right.
the Jewish people back to Israel.
Exactly.
And back to God.
Yes.
Where they
he's
cry out, blessed is you comes in the name of the Lord.
Right. He's got to take the economy down so there's no reason to stay. And then he's going to have persecution. How many of you know they always blame the victim? That's what society does. And I believe Israel's going to defend themselves and protect themselves and maybe wipe out Iran, maybe wipe out Damascus, and then everyone's going to blame the Jews for protecting themselves. What I think is going to happen, that is going to cause persecution amongst the Jewish people. I think you're going to see all kinds of attacks against Jewish people in America and around the world, which is going to drive them back to the land.
We've already seen it in France. We've seen it in Argentina. It's clearly happening.
This is what is going to happen because he wants them back there. And so that's exactly what I see unfolding. Now, here's the thing. Just like the people with Jonah didn't want to throw Jonah out of the boat, but they felt the only way they're going to survive is if they throw him out of the boat. And there's going to be a lot of great people in America that don't want to throw the Jews out, but they're going to be blaming the Jews. I mean, obviously, you're going to have terrorist attacks, but instead of blaming the terrorists, we're going to blame the Jews, saying, well, if they weren't here, we wouldn't have been attacked. I mean, that's the thinking.
We have to intervene here in saying that there's good news in all this.
Yes. And now,
God protects his people.
Exactly.
God's going to rescue the Jewish people.
And I think that goes back to the Sukkah.
And they're going to get saved.
I think that goes back to the Sukkah. To the whole concept is known as the Feast of Nations, and all the nations are to come and rejoice with his people. And I believe God is going to protect his people. There is no doubt. It's just that our calendar is a pagan calendar formed by Julius Caesar. It was called the Julian calendar. Pope Gregory tweaked it and it was changed to the Gregorian calendar. And it's a very scientific calendar based totally on the sun. And the Muslim calendar is based totally on the moon. It's a very great scientific calendar. But neither one of those are the one God uses. Okay, Genesis 1:14, God also says, I want to use both of them for my calendar to determine the Moedim or to determine the feast days. And that's the one he uses. I like to tell people, if your boss tells you he wants to meet you at 4 o'clock on Friday, and if you tell him, well, that doesn't work in my schedule, how about 2 o'clock on Tuesday? You're not going to have a job for very long. Well, God has the calendar. I used to live in Garden City, Kansas. Now, unless you've ever lived in a place like this, you never have a concept of what it's like. If you live right on a time zone, Garden City was right on the time zone.
I can't even imagine living on a time zone, you know? Your neighbor's an hour ahead of you.
Exactly,
you know?
and that's without traffic, you know. But right, you would call a neighbor and say, hey, you know, do you want to go for dinner? Yeah, whose time zone, yours or mine, you know? You know, and so we have to realize we need the calendar we're on. God said we're in the world, but we're not of it. And so we need our calendar, but we also need to be on God's calendar because that's the one that he uses to communicate to us. And I believe, and I mean this in a respectful way, that I think we're entering the Super Bowl of human history. And it's the greatest time, the greatest revivals. I think the church is going to excel. I think we're going to succeed. Matter of fact, in Malachi, it talks about the enemy will be tromped under your feet. And I think a lot of people have a misconception and they're too afraid. They need to not move in fear whatsoever. Oh, yeah.
Great picture.
I think that we need to move in confidence. I know there are people right now that, you know, they're already experiencing tribulation. If you're a Christian and you're in Iran or Syria or some of these places, you know, it's not real good. But see, in one sense, it's really different for me. And again, I don't expect everyone to have the same line of thinking as I have. But I've almost died so many times I've lost count. I've had guns at my head twice, just me and the gunman, and they said they were going to blow my head off both times. And it's just me and them, and I'm still here. And major car accidents where I'm not buckled in and I roll over the length of 100 yards, a football field, and all I did was sprain my ankle. And I just really believe that if it's not my time, it's not going to happen. And if it is my time, there's nothing to do to stop it. Right. So I stopped worrying about it, and I just want to get the job done that God has called me to do.
We occupy until He comes.
Exactly. Every one of you that are here were created for such a time as this. You could have lived any time in history, but God said, I need you to run the final lap of the baton, in the track race. He's given each one of you because He knows you're the one that He needs to do the task. Why would we not want to pick up the baton and run with it?
Yes.
And the whole concept, people misunderstand waiting for the fullness of the Gentiles to come in. When the Lord will begin to build up Zion, that's when He'll appear in His glory. Well, Zion is Jerusalem, and it's the whole problem politically today is because they're building up Zion with all the settlements in 67.
Everyone in the studio and everyone watching by the program right now at home or wherever you are, you have a divine destiny for such a time as this.
Exactly.
And I think of that word of Mordecai to his niece Esther.
Yes.
You've been called to the kingdom for such a time as this. And if deliverance doesn't come through you, God will raise up another. But it's to be through us. We're the ones that have been called for this time, at this appointed time in history.
And it uses that term set time in Psalms 102. And it even says this is being written for the generation to come. And in Hebrew, it's akaron, which means the terminal generation.
Yes, it's exciting. Now, back to the blood moon. Does this signal, do you believe, that we're entering into the tribulation? Or so is it immediate? Is it now? Will judgment happen on the day of this eclipse? What should we look for?
Well, I don't think anything is going to happen necessarily on that very day. But I think all four of these, including that one, God always wants to warn before He brings judgment. I think we could see, judgment's already is starting for that matter. But I think we're going to see, as you said, the birth pangs. They're going to get stronger. They're going to get closer. And 2016 is going to be an incredible year. I think we're going to see a lot of judgment. We got the elections the end of 2016. So whoever is elected is the one who's going to be carrying us the next 4 years. I think God is like the master chess player. Every person's being put in position.
I think we can all agree on one thing, though. Road signs. An example of bridge out. You better be paying attention.
That's
or
the
you're
key.
Going to die if you don't slow down. And I think we have signs. We have road signs in many areas. Israel becoming a nation, Jerusalem being restored. But I see these 4 consecutive blood moons being directly connected to road signs where God is trying to warn His people, to wake up His people, to warn the world. Get ready.
And I think the reason why, too, is because no false prophet can manipulate an eclipse. The sun and the moon are beyond anyone's control. The calendar is beyond anyone's control. So God, and they speak in every language. You don't have to, if God wants to communicate to everybody from every tribe, nation, and tongue, what better way than to use something that can speak to every language?
Yeah, good point. Good point. Now, I didn't see this on your website, but other websites, other articles talk about these eclipses affecting power sources, affecting tides in a very severe way. And any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I like sticking with facts. I like sticking with the science, the history. Sure, things could happen. But I think we all need to be prepared for a few weeks, no matter what. Our government is not going to come meeting our needs. And I think we need to realize that. Look at Hurricane Katrina, how long it took to get things done. So I think, and as far as like storing up food, I really believe just like the widow with 1 cruse of oil, if all you can afford is 1 can of beans, get your 1 can of beans. God can multiply it like He did the bread and the loaves, But so for me, I don't think, again, no one should be in fear. Do whatever you can do according to whatever budget you have. But for me, I have food not to hoard, but to share. Because like Joseph, when the time came, they had to come to Joseph. And I want people to come to me and get my food, and I can share the gospel with them, and God can always multiply whatever I have.
Give me your address before you leave, by the way.
I think that's the greatest question you could ask. And to me, the main thing is get right with God. And be praying for your family members that they get right with God. Because how many of us want to be warned? I always tell people, tell me, I can handle it, but let me decide what I'm going to do. And so God wants to warn all of us, but it's a sword, but it cuts two ways. A sword can either kill you or it can save your life by taking out your appendix. So it just depends, and God warns because he loves us. And so I think we need to take heed to God's warning, and we need to get right with God.